On the evening of August 1st, 1944, inside a bomb-scarred headquarters in western France, several senior German officers reviewed the situation maps in near silence. The front lines were no longer lines at all. They were fractures. Entire German divisions had disappeared from the map in a matter of days. Roads that had been expected to hold for weeks had collapsed overnight. One name appeared repeatedly in after-action reports, intelligence summaries, and urgent communications to Berlin: George S. Patton. For German commanders, Patton was not just another Allied general. He represented something new, unpredictable, and deeply dangerous. By the summer of 1944, many German officers had fought British commanders and American commanders alike. They understood Allied doctrine. They knew how Montgomery advanced. They knew how Bradley coordinated. Patton, however, defied their expectations. He did not follow the patterns they had prepared to counter. Patton's reputation among German generals did not begin in France. It began in North Africa nearly 2 years earlier. In March 1943, following the defeat of American forces at Kasserine Pass, German commanders believed they had identified the character of the U.S. Army. They viewed it as inexperienced, cautious, and slow to adapt. Then Patton arrived. Within weeks, American units under his command began operating differently. Discipline tightened. Movement accelerated. Attacks became relentless. German reports from Tunisia noted a sudden increase in American aggressiveness and coordination. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, commanding Axis forces in Tunisia, remarked that American operations had become unexpectedly rapid and well organized. The change was attributed directly to new leadership. German officers noticed that Patton did not wait for perfect conditions. He attacked when opportunities appeared, often before defenses were fully prepared. This pattern repeated in Sicily in July 1943. German and Italian commanders initially underestimated the Allied landings. They expected a slow build-up and cautious advance. Patton's 7th Army shattered those assumptions. His forces moved aggressively across the island, capturing Palermo on July 22nd and Messina on August 17th. German commanders observed that Patton consistently outpaced British forces, exploiting gaps and bypassing resistance rather than becoming fixed by it. Field reports sent to Berlin described Patton as impulsive but effective. German intelligence officers noted that his speed disrupted their ability to organize coherent defenses. Units intended to delay Allied progress were overrun before they could establish positions. This ability to collapse timelines made Patton especially dangerous. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, German High Command was already wary of Patton's potential role. His absence from the initial landings reinforced their concern. German intelligence concluded that Patton must be commanding a follow-up force intended to deliver the decisive blow. This belief became central to Operation Fortitude, the Allied deception plan. Fake armies, dummy equipment, and false radio traffic convinced German commanders that Patton would lead the main invasion across the Pass des Calais. German generals did not believe this deception because they were careless. They believed it because it aligned with their assessment of Patton's character. If the Allies intended to strike decisively, Patton would be the one chosen to lead it. When Patton finally entered combat in Normandy in late July 1944, German fears were confirmed. On July 25th, Operation shattered German defenses west of St. Ella. Within days, Patton's newly activated Third Army was unleashed. What followed shocked even experienced German officers. Entire German formations disintegrated under the speed of the American advance. Roads filled with destroyed vehicles. Command structures collapsed. General Junathan Blumentritt later wrote that Patton's advance was like lightning. German units could not reposition quickly enough to meet his thrusts. Attempts to establish defensive lines failed because Patton simply went around them. German generals reported that Patton's forces appeared where they were least expected, often faster than intelligence assessments predicted. What made Patton particularly dangerous was not just speed, but unpredictability. German doctrine relied on identifying enemy main efforts and concentrating forces to oppose them. Patton denied them that clarity. He attacked simultaneously across wide fronts, creating confusion about his true objectives. German commanders found themselves reacting instead of planning. By August 1944, the German situation in France was catastrophic. The encirclement at Falaise sealed the fate of much of the German army in the west. While multiple Allied forces contributed, German commanders specifically blamed Patton's relentless pressure for preventing organized withdrawal. He attacked retreating columns, cut escape routes, and turned tactical retreats into disasters. German generals began referring to Patton as the most aggressive Allied commander. Some went further. They considered him the most dangerous, not because he commanded the largest forces, but because he refused to give them time. Time German officers knew was their most valuable resource. Patton denied it consistently. This reputation followed him into Germany in 1945. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine, German commanders expected a pause. They expected consolidation. Patton did neither. His Third Army surged forward again, capturing territory at a pace that stunned defenders. German reports described American columns advancing so quickly that defensive plans were rendered obsolete before they could be executed. Patton's psychological impact was as significant as his tactical one. German troops feared facing his units. Commanders worried that any sector opposite Patton might collapse without warning. His name became shorthand for chaos within German planning circles. Yet what truly frightened German generals was not Patton's aggression alone. It was his refusal to conform to predictable patterns of warfare. He combined discipline with audacity, preparation with improvisation. He exploited success immediately, without waiting for permission or perfect alignment. For German commanders trained in structured, methodical operations, Patton represented a nightmare opponent. He did not fight the war they expected. He fought the war as it unfolded, and that made him the most dangerous Allied commander they faced. By late August 1944, German commanders no longer debated whether Patton was dangerous. They debated how to survive him. Intelligence reports flowing into Army Group B headquarters described a pattern that defied German planning assumptions. Patton did not pause after success. He accelerated. Each breakthrough became a launch point for the next attack, compressing German reaction time to almost nothing. German doctrine depended on elasticity. Defensive lines were designed to bend, withdraw, and reform. Patton broke that rhythm. His Third Army advanced faster than German staffs could issue orders. By the time a withdrawal was authorized, American armor was already cutting the roads meant for retreat. German generals described this as fighting an enemy who operated head of the clock. General Junetha Blumentritt later explained that Patton's greatest strength was tempo. German command culture relied on centralized control, written orders, and confirmation before movement. Patton exploited that weakness relentlessly. His subordinates were encouraged to act on intent rather than instruction. German units waiting for orders found themselves attacked from unexpected directions before those orders arrived. This problem became acute during the collapse following the Falaise pocket. German commanders attempted to establish fallback positions along rivers and road junctions in eastern France. Patton ignored those expectations. Instead of striking directly at prepared positions, his units bypassed them, seized crossings far in advance, and turned defensive plans into liabilities. German after-action reports repeatedly noted that American forces under Patton appeared in rear areas with no warning. German intelligence officers struggled to predict Patton's objectives. Unlike Montgomery, whose methodical planning allowed German analysts to anticipate timing and direction, Patton provided no such clarity. He attacked broadly, probing constantly, forcing German commanders to defend everywhere at once. This diluted already scarce reserves and accelerated collapse. By September 1944, German generals began warning Berlin that Patton's presence alone altered operational calculations. Sectors opposite his army required more attention, more reserves, and more caution. Yet Germany had none of those resources left to spare. Patton thus became a force multiplier, not through numbers but through fear and disruption. This perception intensified during the Lorraine campaign. German commanders attempted to stabilize the front using terrain and fortified positions. Patton responded with relentless pressure, repeated assaults, and rapid maneuver. Even when his advance slowed due to logistics, German officers noted that he never truly stopped attacking. He probed constantly, looking for weakness, denying defenders rest. One German divisional commander wrote that Patton's units never allowed a quiet night. Small-scale attacks, reconnaissance in force, and aggressive patrolling kept German units exhausted and disoriented. This psychological pressure compounded material losses. German generals also feared Patton's ability to recover quickly from setbacks. When resistance stiffened or supply shortages forced pauses, Patton adapted. He shifted axes, exploited secondary routes, and resumed pressure elsewhere. German doctrine expected pauses to provide relief. With Patton, pauses were temporary and deceptive. The German High Command attempted to counter this by labeling Patton as reckless. Internal memoranda suggested that his speed would eventually expose him to counterattack. This belief persisted into late 1944, yet repeated attempts to exploit perceived overextension failed. Patton's flanks, though stretched, were rarely unguarded. His emphasis on aggressive reconnaissance ensured that German movements were detected early. By the time of the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, German planners still viewed Patton as their most dangerous opponent. They deliberately avoided confronting his army directly during the initial stages, focusing instead on sectors held by less aggressive commanders. Even then, Patton's response to the surprise attack shattered German expectations. Within days, he pivoted his entire army north, relieving Bastogne faster than German intelligence believed possible. German officers later admitted that this maneuver convinced them that Patton operated on a different level of responsiveness. His ability to reorient forces rapidly contradicted German assumptions about American rigidity. This adaptability, combined with speed, made him uniquely difficult to counter. As the war entered 1945, German commanders facing collapse increasingly spoke of Patton not as a general, but as a phenomenon. He embodied everything Germany could no longer match: mobility, initiative, and confidence. His armies moved while German forces hesitated. His commanders acted while German officers awaited orders. This imbalance defined the final months of the war. When Patton crossed the Rhine, German commanders expected caution. They received momentum. When they hoped for consolidation, they faced pursuit. Each expectation proved wrong. By early April 1945, German reports described American forces advancing without regard for conventional pauses. Patton's Third Army captured territory faster than German staffs could process losses. Defensive plans existed only on paper. Reality moved faster. For German generals, this was the ultimate failure of doctrine. They had prepared to fight an enemy bound by structure. Patton was not. He was disciplined but not rigid. He was aggressive but not careless. Most dangerously of all, he forced German commanders to react instead of think. That was why they feared him. He did not just defeat German units, he destroyed their ability to plan. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, surviving German generals began the long process of explaining defeat. Memoirs were written, interrogations conducted. Allied intelligence officers debriefed former commanders in an effort to understand what had gone wrong. Again and again, one name surfaced in these conversations with an unusual consistency: George S. Patton. What is striking is that German officers did not speak of Patton with bitterness or exaggeration. They spoke of him with respect and often with unease. In post-war interviews conducted by the U.S. Army Historical Division, several German generals described Patton as the Allied commander they found most difficult to anticipate. Not the most powerful, not the best supplied, the most dangerous. General Hasso von Manteuffel, one of Germany's most capable armored commanders, later remarked that Patton understood mobile warfare instinctively. Manteuffel noted that while other Allied generals relied on overwhelming preparation, Patton relied on momentum. That distinction mattered. German doctrine was built on the assumption that enemies required time to reorganize after major actions. Patton violated that assumption repeatedly. German officers acknowledged that Patton fought in a way that resembled their own early war successes. His emphasis on rapid exploitation, decentralized decision-making, and relentless pressure mirrored the tactics Germany had used in Poland, France, and the early stages of the Soviet campaign. Facing Patton was, in a sense, like facing a reflection of their former selves, but backed by superior resources. This recognition unsettled German commanders deeply. They understood how destructive such an approach could be when executed properly. They had relied on similar methods when their own forces were strong. Now those methods were being used against them, at a moment when Germany lacked the ability to respond. One recurring theme in German assessments was Patton's refusal to allow defeat to become recovery. German generals explained that many Allied commanders paused after major engagements, consolidating gains and restoring order. Patton rarely did. When German units retreated in good order, he pursued. When they attempted to regroup, he struck again. This denied German forces the breathing space they needed to restore cohesion. German officers also commented on Patton's psychological impact. His reputation preceded him. Units knew when they were facing Third Army. This knowledge affected morale. Defensive positions opposite Patton were manned with anxiety rather than confidence. German commanders reported that even experienced troops feared sudden breakthroughs and unexpected maneuvers. Perhaps most telling were German reflections on Patton's leadership style. They noted that his subordinates appeared empowered to act independently. Orders were executed quickly, sometimes without detailed coordination. To German officers accustomed to strict hierarchy, this flexibility was difficult to counter. It meant that destroying one unit or disrupting one command post did not paralyze the entire formation. In contrast, German command culture had become increasingly rigid as the war progressed. Hitler's interference had centralized authority to a crippling degree. Commanders waited for permission. Initiative was discouraged. Patton's army thrived on initiative. German armies suffocated under its absence. German generals recognized this imbalance even as it destroyed them. In the final weeks of the war, as Patton's forces advanced through central Germany and into Czechoslovakia, German resistance collapsed unevenly. Some units surrendered without fighting. Others attempted desperate stands that were quickly overwhelmed. German officers later admitted that Patton's pace made organized surrender difficult. Events moved too fast. Decisions had to be made immediately, often without guidance from higher command. This chaos was not accidental. It was the product of sustained pressure. Patton did not allow German forces to transition smoothly from combat to surrender. He forced them to choose quickly, often under threat of encirclement or destruction. German commanders understood that this approach reduced prolonged fighting, even if it appeared ruthless. After the war, many German generals expressed surprise that Patton was not more influential in Allied strategic planning. They assumed that someone so effective in battle would dominate post-war military thought. Instead, they learned that Patton had been controversial among his own allies. His discipline issues, his outspoken nature, and his unwillingness to conform had limited his role at higher levels. To German officers, this was puzzling. From their perspective, Patton represented exactly the type of commander modern warfare rewarded. He combined operational skill with psychological warfare. He exploited enemy weakness instantly. He refused to let war settle into predictable patterns. One German officer summarized this view succinctly during a post-war interview. "We feared Patton because he never allowed us to recover. Other commanders defeated us, Patton broke us." This distinction explains why Patton's reputation endured among former enemies even as it remained complicated among allies. German generals judged him not by decorum or politics, but by effect, and the effect was undeniable. Patton did not merely defeat German forces. He dismantled their ability to function as an army. He attacked their planning, their morale, and their assumptions. He turned time into a weapon and used it relentlessly. That is why German generals considered him the most dangerous Allied commander. Not because he was flawless, not because he was always right, but because when he appeared on the battlefield, the war no longer followed rules Germany understood. And once those rules collapsed, defeat followed quickly.